since 1999. And it's clear we're getting into some topics where it'd be nice to have a bigger room, so we'll start thinking about how we might do that. I'm David Crossley, I'm president of Houston Tomorrow, and we are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to improve the quality of life in the Houston region. And we have this, you didn't see this little booklet we have here. Our vision for 2036, which would be Houston's 200th birthday, is that at that time the Houston region would be home to the healthiest, happiest, most prosperous people in the United States. So that's a lot of quality of life stuff involved in that. So we're working on trying to figure out what those things mean. One note, this afternoon at 4 o'clock, there will be a public comment session over at the TxDOT building, which is, if you know how Washington kind of goes west and then turns up to I-10. It's just across I-10, beautiful building, cool building on your right. There will be a press conference around 3:15, so if you want to show up and participate in that. And it's about the state transportation improvement plan for the next 4 years. And as you may know, a huge portion of that state, almost $5 billion, is to build the Grand Parkway, or State Highway 99 around the region. At the same time, we're struggling to find enough money to fix 1960 and stuff like that. So there will be, I expect it will be a hot, interesting. So in the meantime, we're moving forward with our transit plans, and Metro is now involved in this long-range planning effort, which George Greanias will tell you all about, so I won't. And I'll just say we're excited to have him here, and we're excited about things that are happening at Metro, and we kind of like to look at stuff so far. So George, thanks very much for coming, and if you want to just get into it, please. Thank you.
It's not working. You're my clicker? This is going to be an opportunity. Thank you all for the chance to talk with you all today. We have launched in the last couple of weeks our updating of the long-term plan for Metro. And we're taking a somewhat different tack. Some of you may actually have attended the kickoff session we had down at the main building 2 weeks ago. We had about 200 people in attendance, and we ran through the presentation and explained what the process was going to be. And since then, we've launched into these sessions. There's 24 of them scheduled. They'll be running through June the 30th. In addition, several neighborhood organizations and regional organizations have asked for additional sessions for them. So I expect that the final number will approach something closer to 30, which, as Christoph Spieler was pointing out in our board meeting today, is unusual for a public agency in a planning process like this to engage in that many sessions across the service area. But we think it's essential to having a successful process. The second piece is, although we have a presentation we make at the start to sort of set the context, we are not laying out proposals or recommendations. We simply want to sort of give you the state of play and some of the issues we need to think about addressing. And then we've really literally been asking people to help us think through what services could be beneficial, what services do we have now that could be altered to be more effective, what things are we doing now maybe we shouldn't be doing. And we've been doing those at table sessions, workshop sessions, following the presentation, literally with maps on the table of the particular area we're working in that night, and people drawing. We also have this interactive map at each of the locations, and people can go there and actually draw their own routes, design their own routes, and submit those. You can also do that online. We have an interactive site online where you can design routes and submit them for consideration as part of this process. Today will be a little different in that we will not do the work tables figuring the space situation, so we'll sort of do a group hug when it comes to the discussion of options. But first we want to go through and give you the presentation so you can see what we're sharing with folks to get them thinking about transit in this region. I want to start out by saying even the cover slide, the logo, if you will, has been a subject of some thought. You'll notice that we actually have people walking and on bicycles, as well as we have several different modes of transportation up on the left-hand side. We're trying very hard to start thinking about two things, going two approaches. Number one, what I've taken to calling, nobody else has, but I call it being mode agnostic. What I mean by that is, in any particular corridor, we don't go in with the preconception of what should work. We look at the needs of the corridor, the requirements, the likely capacity of the corridor, and we try to figure out what makes the most sense. In our budget this year, we called that the Alternative Service Program, where we're trying different types of vehicles, and in several cases even talking about things like going to taxi cab vouchers, where it doesn't make sense to run a full-blown service, but there are people who need access to transit. It may be cheaper to provide taxi vouchers for them and get them to a transit center and then bring them into the system that way. So our notion really, you don't want to say mode agnostic, you can say whatever works. The other part of this is something that I've really gotten educated on in the year that I've been at Metro, and that is to think about the issue of mobility as more than just our piece, more than just the bus we run, the train we run, the Metro Lift service, or so forth. To think about the entire trip, door to door, start to stop, the complete trip, and how do you make that the most efficient and effective for the people that you serve. And that's one reason we have those people walking down there. We have people on bicycles. Because frankly, we can have the best bus service in the world, but if the sidewalks are not in good shape so you can't get to the bus stop, fewer people will use the service. Same way, if you can't use your bicycle to go to a bus, load your bike on the bus, and then get off and ride to your final destination, fewer of our bicycle riders will ride the buses or the trains. We're very pleased with the fact that because we have made the buses bike accessible, and we expanded the hours and the space for bikes on our trains, we've hit about 10,000 bicycle boardings in March. And we pretty much doubled the number of bicycle boardings over the last 2 years. It's been a very successful program, and it continues to grow. And I might compliment the bike community, which has been very cooperative with us in terms of creating an environment in which we can open up the space and the bicycle riders take appropriate opportunities to use it without blocking doors and so forth. It's been plus. So, enough about the start. Let's go into this. Kim Slaughter, who is doing the button pushing here, was one of the key authors of this presentation, although being Metro, everybody kibitzed about it. And we got right away this idea of, we want to be a world-class city. And I think, first of all, we all groaned because we've heard world-class so often. And the question is, what does that really mean? And importantly, what does it really mean for the average citizen in this area? And Kim came across something that we've taken as sort of our mantra. A great world-class city is really nothing more and nothing less than a great place to call home. For most of us, that's what a world-class city is. It's a great place to live. And these are great shots of the variety of neighborhoods and environments that are encompassed in our service area. It's an extraordinarily diverse tapestry of neighborhoods and people, economic situations. You know many of these sites, you've seen them. But remember that our service area is 1,200 plus square miles. You could take the land areas of 12 major American cities and put them all simultaneously into our land area and still have little space left over. So if the idea of a great city is one that's a great place to call home, where these pictures are something we can all be proud of, what makes the region great? And remember, we're saying region, not the city of Houston. We are the Metropolitan Transit Authority of Harris County, not Houston Metro. And more importantly, we're just one piece of the puzzle, because when you look at our region, we're anywhere between 8 and 13 counties, depending on what way you're looking at it. It's going to take more than just Metro to solve the regional transit needs of this area. So what makes our region great? What's going to help make it even greater? Well, number one, great educational opportunities. Whether it's our public schools, the private schools, the charter schools that are coming up, or the institutions of higher education. I've lost count. Last time I remember we had 11 universities in this area. I think the number is actually higher than that. When you start totaling them up, University of Houston, Texas Southern University, University of St. Thomas, Houston Baptist University, Rice University, the list goes on and on. Community colleges, extraordinarily important part of the system. We have a lot of educational institutions, and that's a very big cornerstone of a place that's a great place to call home. Number two, economic opportunities. Even in the economic downturn, even with the stress we have felt in this region as part of the national economic downturn, Houston continues to be, relatively speaking, a vibrant job market, a great place for 2.7 million people to work. And third, reliable transportation. We refined our mission statement, or we just basically don't call it a mission statement anymore. It says, what do we do? And what we do at Metro is to provide safe, affordable, reliable, and convenient public transportation. That's all we're about. And that, we think, is an important part of having a reliable transportation network that is part of a larger mobility system that gets people around in a reasonable and affordable way. Now, here's the question. If a great place to call home are the things we've talked about here, and our job is to provide the transport. There's some challenges. We got more and more people showing up in our service area. 1980 in our area is just under 4 million. We are growing, projected to 2040 to be just at about 10 million people. And we'll see a little bit when we look at some maps about where those people are going to be. Creates all kinds of issues. Somehow we need to move those folks around. Number two, where are we growing? Well, this is the map in 2000, showing the density and distribution and density of our population. Let's go and look at what happens when it goes to 2010, which is just last year. Well, the areas that were already dense get denser, but we're starting to see infill in the outlying areas. And remember how large our overall service area is. If Metro should be accused of anything, it's that we're still not reaching everybody that needs to be reached with transit services. That's really the big issue. It's not that we're not doing a good job, we're just not doing it for enough people. And when people say I won't want to use transit, what they're really saying is it's not convenient enough for me, it's not reliable enough for me, and mostly it's not convenient enough for me. I contend that if we could run a bus past every major corridor every 6 minutes, day in and day out, a whole lot of people would use transit. If they could do, they could make connections across the region, and that if they got off this bus, about 6 minutes, another one would come to take them to their final destination, you would see ridership go way up. When people say I don't use it, they say I don't use it because it doesn't get me where I need to go in an affordable, reliable, convenient amount of time. So as we see this population get increasingly dense and having densities out in the outlying areas, here's one of our challenges. How do we provide transit for these people so they're not solely reliable in automobiles? So population growth is one challenge for us. What's another challenge? Well, the fact is, there's good and bad news about a good economy. A good economy creates jobs, and that's really good. So our jobs grew from 1980 at about 1.5 million, 1,750,000 employees. Pretty steady growth projected. And so by 2040, we're talking about something just under 4 million employees. That's the good news. The bad news is you got to get all those people to their jobs. You got to be able to move them to their jobs. And in just a minute, you'll see we're already doing a substantial amount of that when it comes to places like the downtown and the medical center. But that challenge is just going to increase. Second of all, you have to worry about where those jobs are. So here's the distribution in 2000, the density. By the way, you can sort of surmise where your major employment centers are just by the heavily blue areas. And as it grows through 2010, those areas intensify, but we add additional areas in 2040. Well, the areas that have been dense all along have gotten denser, but suddenly we've got other pockets of high employment. And we need to figure out how we can get employees to those locations. So two big challenges, employment and jobs. We're already better off than most states. We have, as I said a moment ago, 2.7 million people working in this area. And that is more than 27 states. We beat 27 different states in terms of total employment. That is, best I can tell, Arizona and Minnesota. I got my states right. We outpace both those states in terms of employment. We have more employees at work than folks in Arizona and folks in Minnesota. And of course, all those 27 states are behind us when it comes to jobs. And this is data from the recessionary period, not pre-recession. These are recession-era numbers. Here's our major employment centers. Overlay on that employment distribution map that we talked about. And I mentioned that we're already doing a good job in certain areas. Downtown, some 36% of the folks that are working downtown on a daily basis are getting there on a metro service. When you look at the medical center, the number is something like 32%. Now, think about this for a second. How many of you have tried to ever park in the medical center? Yeah, what a joy. Now, let's assume, just for the sake of argument, that employment at the medical center, not the visitors, not the patients, but doctors, nurses, technicians, support services, is in the 70,000 person range. That's probably a tad under, but they've lost a little employment because of the recession. But let's say it's 70,000, a very conservative number. If 32% of that 70,000 folks, which would be somewhere between 21 and 22,000, suddenly no longer had access to metro services and had to get to the medical center, not to a parking lot, but they had to walk 1.5 miles, but get into the medical center to park to go to work, the medical center could not function. It simply could not work. Without metro, the medical center is helpless. Downtown experiences much the same situation. And increasingly, as we get better at providing services to our other major employment and activity centers, this reliance will increase. It's a good thing if we're there to provide the service. So one of the challenges in our conversation will be, how do we do that? How do we link up these major activity centers? So what exists today? Well, every day during the week, about 370,000 folks are relying on Metro to get around in all of our various services. We have a number of these services as they exist today. And let me make it clear. This is the map as it is today. It doesn't need to be the map tomorrow, but it's what's there today. And what's there today are our local bus service, 1,200 buses running at 10,000 bus stops across the area. But again, you can see large parts of the service area that are not currently touched, but as the growth happens, we'll need to figure out how to get to them. We have our HOV system, close to 100 miles of HOV lanes, which are extraordinarily successful, and we're now currently transitioning those over to give single occupancy vehicles the option on non-peak periods by paying a small toll to use the HOV lane. We have our signature bus service, which is an express bus service. You think about the one on Bel Air. It's a blue bus. You may have seen it. It's sort of a fancier bus. It runs on far fewer stops, has a faster speed getting down that route. And then, of course, we've got our little red line, which, despite being a little red line, is extraordinarily successful. There was a great note in the Chronicle today. I just read it on the way over here. Somebody wrote a letter in response to Bill King's article last week, where he was trying to take the booking study and made a bunch of inapposite conclusions. If you really want to read something, read Nate Silver's blog in the New York Times. I think Silver has the right analysis about how you look at the booking study if you want to look at it. But the point that this person made was, everybody talks about how this line, rail won't work in Houston. But, you know, my problem with this line is it reminds me what Yogi Berra says. Nobody goes there anymore. It's too crowded. The problem is this line is extraordinarily successful. It was projected to reach 75 million boarding in 2014 when it first opened. We hit that in December of last year, 4 years ahead of schedule. During the NCAA Final Four, we actually hit 52,000 rides on that Monday, which was the regular riders plus all the folks going to the game. We are now ordering additional cars for that line, for the Main Street line, simply because we can't meet all the rush hour demand successfully. We're actually losing a little bit of business because we don't have enough room during the peak periods. And so this is actually, on a per-mile basis of rail, the second most heavily traveled line in the United States, with the exception of Boston. And Boston's been at it for about 100 years. So we've got our red line, but now we're expanding. And we just today got word from the federal government. They gave us 2 new what are called letters of no prejudice. Those of you know what those are. If you're in line for a grant, but you want to spend some of your own money and be in line to get reimbursed, you get them to pre-approve. They just to pre-approve work for our North Corridor, $43 million? $43 million of work we can move forward on. And for our Southeast Corridor, something like $42 million. And by the way, think about this. We're all worried about whether we get those full funding grant agreements. I make no absolute prediction, but would they really be giving us all these permissions to move forward if they weren't intending, at the end of the day, to sign a $900 million grant for these 2 lines? I've got to believe we'll have, if all goes well, to conclude successfully those negotiations. The first rail grants the city of Houston has ever received for this kind of thing. And of course, we've got our Harrisburg, our East End line, running out to the Magnolia Transit Center. These projects have all come back on path since January. We're out there paving. You'll actually see rail going into place in July in a couple of the corridors. Pretty exciting stuff. And then we've got the University line, which is an east-west line running from University of Houston and TSU west to the Hillcroft Transit Center. And then up Post Oak, a line that will then complete that section. And you see we're almost to the point of having created a loop of rail, which becomes the core of an overall system. Again, not creating a hub and spoke system as much as connecting major activity centers. In addition, we are doing environmental studies on the 90A corridor, for a rail corridor out that way. If you think about it, Missouri City and Stafford are sort of the end of that part of our service area. There's a lot of people there that work at the medical center. This is a major connector for them. And of course, the growth out there has been spectacular. Personal editorial comment, if we do this, I would love to see it go into Sugar Land, even though it's not part of our service area, through some sort of joint agreement. It makes no sense to me to stop at Missouri and Stafford when you've got Sugar Land exploding the way it is on Fort Bend County. So these are our services, and you can see how we're already connecting up many of our major activity centers, like downtown, TMC, Greenway, the University, the Galleria area, rather, West Chase, the Energy Corridor, up north at Greensboro. So, what are the services we're currently providing by way of backdrop? Well, we got our local bus service, which I already talked about. We've got our commuter rails park and ride services, which I didn't mention before. We have 29 current park and ride lots. We're looking at building 2 more, one in Missouri City and a lot in Pearland. The one in Pearland is interesting because it's actually outside of our service area. But about 7,000 folks in Pearland work in the medical center, And so 288 being the joy to ride that it is, it makes sense to try to provide them some alternative to automobiles. Metro Rail, that I talked about. Metro Lift is our service for the disabled. We have about 16,000 folks who rely on Metro Lift to get around every day. We do about 1,500,000 trips a year. I'm personally very proud of this one because the federal government mandates how much of your service area must be covered by services for the disabled. Metro has actually chosen to have more service than is required by federal law. We serve 29% more land area with these services than the federal government requires. And I'm very proud of it. I think it's an important part of what a good community, a great place to call home is. You care for everybody in the city and provide them equal access to the benefits of the community. Our HOV and HOT lanes are already commented on. Metro Star is our van pool program, extraordinarily successful, and our motorist assistance program. But as I like to tell folks, even if you've never ridden a Metro service, you've probably benefited from Metro thanks to the General Mobility Program. This is a program where 1/4 of every penny that Metro collects out of its sales tax is contributed to the City of Houston, Harris County, and the 14 small cities in our service area. Since 1988, Metro has contributed something over $2 billion to street and road improvements throughout this region. So even if you've never ridden or touched a Metro service, you've probably been on a Metro-funded street improvement. It's an extraordinary contribution. It has its downside in terms of its hampering our ability to deliver transit, but it has provided a lot of street and road work. And this is one of the issues we need to think about going forward. Now, as you think about options, why do we think about transit? These are 200 randomly selected Metro employees who just happened to be standing on a rail platform one day. We took a picture. And, okay, so we need to get them off the platform. So we drive up in a car, and the car drives off, having taken a grand total of one person with the car. So we still got 199 folks on the platform. Not good enough. So we bring a van in, one of our Metro Star vans. Well, this is a little bit better. We can put 12 people in here, and off they go. And, of course, we still got 188 folks sitting on the platform. All right, bus. 47 folks on average, so we put 47 people in. We're still going to have about what? My math being what it is, 153 people still sitting on the platform. Off goes the bus. So we put a rail car in there, and we can put 200 folks in that train, and we clear the platform. Now, the point isn't that rail is the greatest thing since sliced bread. The point is that different technologies are useful in different environments, in different corridors for different levels of demand. And the technique isn't to impose one methodology across the board, it's to figure out which of these various options, including the car sometimes, is the best option for getting people around in a certain environment. What we're here today to talk about is the same thing we've been doing in these sessions, which is where do we go from here? The agency was founded in 1978 after a voter referendum that established the agency and dedicated a penny of sales tax. We opened our transit ways in 1985 for the first time. TransStar, which is the big overall mobility operations center, opened in 1996. The Metrorail service was inaugurated in 2004. We reached that 75 millionth boarding, as I said, in 2010. What we're doing now is not to overturn the work or the history. It's what's the next phase, what's the next chapter for Metro. The big difference that we're trying to take, the bit different course we're trying to take in this situation is to spend much more time listening to everybody in the community, to getting everybody else's ideas rather than throwing ours out there at the very start. And it is being taken very, very seriously. I think that a lot of people, given Metro's history, that are skeptical, and Metro says, we're here to listen, we genuinely want to hear what you have to say. But I got to tell you, Kim and her staff, the various people that are volunteering across the agency, the board members, and me too, we are all out there seriously trying to listen and get ideas. We do not regard ourselves as the repository of all transit wisdom. A lot of transit expertise, yeah, a lot of transit knowledge, but we don't necessarily know what's good for every neighborhood. We don't know the neighborhoods intimately enough, we never will. So we need to be out there talking to people because that's the way you build a vision that works for the region. And that's the way you build support for that vision so that people will help you and support you as you go through the process of putting it in place. This is our website for the project. You can address stuff electronically to us. You can go online and do the interactive map, or you can write us. We're doing that across the region, and what we're going to do today is have a little fun and play with that right here. But that's the presentation, and before we go into the rest of this, perhaps a question or two, we've got to do that, and then we'll go into talking about what we might do with all this stuff.
Yeah. understand the status of the university line as you posted it. What is your projection for the university line?
I don't have a projection right now. Here's why I don't. We are doing a certain amount of work that needs to be done to move forward on the environmental work and design work. We want to very much stay in line for federal funding. But the big question mark is that with the $900 million grant that we think we're going to receive for the north and southeast corridors, the federal government will have exhausted its funds under its current authorization for New Start programs. Congress will have to reauthorize the program before there's money for any more New Start grants. And that project calls for 50% federal funding. So it's rumored that Congress will take up a bill this year, given the curious nature of politics at the federal level these days. I don't think we can count on anything being passed this year or maybe even next. So the timeline for actual construction really depends on what happens at the federal level first. Now, we're not sitting idly by. We're looking at alternatives on financing the line that would not involve federal grants. And we're seeing if there's any other way we can do it.
Really referred to this year would not be the reauthorization, would be?
I was referring to the reauthorization, but I seriously doubt that given Congress, yeah. So I think it's several years off at a minimum. I'm thinking of 15, 16. I don't want to even say, I don't hate to give you a date because we just don't know. What we are doing is number one, we're working obviously very hard with our congressional delegation on the authorization. We continue to move the project forward through the FTA process, the Federal Transit Administration process. And we have authorized, the board has authorized a certain amount of money to do the basic design engineering work, as well as when an opportunity comes up to do some work today that will avoid duplicating or redoing work down the road, we'll spend some money. So we, for example, the board approved about $2 million. The Upper Kirby District is currently doing some work at, from Richmond to the freeway. And we want to make sure the utilities were moved in such a way, all the proper utilities were moved out of the way, so if the line comes through there, we would not have to go back and redo all that utility work. So we're trying to, wherever there's an opportunity, and it's not overly expensive to go ahead and do that work, make sure we don't have to go back and do it again or undo what was done by somebody else.
I assume that the Post Oak line is contingent on university.
Post Oak really follows after university and is not a major focus at this point. But it's still on a plan, still intend to get it done, but right now we're taking this very much a step at a time. To be honest with you, what I focus on day to day out is the 3 lines that are under construction right now, because Metro's credibility is based on, 1, winning the federal funds, and 2, getting those lines completed.
Which is the third of those 3? I know north and
north, southeast, and the Harrisburg line.
Harrisburg.
Yeah. North and southeast are roughly 50-50 federal and local funded. Harrisburg is a totally local funded line.
What effort is made for coordination between land use planning, city planning, and
I knew a planner would ask this question. The question was, what's being done to coordinate in land use planning between what Metro does, what the city does, and really what the private area does. And I would say that not nearly enough. I'll give you a classic example. Texas Southern University, being a university, owning the property on both sides of Tier-Wester, has the right under state law to close that street. The problem is that that's a street we were using to provide bus service into that neighborhood, including community homes, a major housing project over there. We were talking to them, but they finally said, no, we're just going to close the street. So they closed it rather abruptly on Christmas Day, and we suddenly had to reroute buses, much to the discomfiture of the people who live out that way. We have talked to the city now about saying, look, when somebody comes in and asks for major street changes, we would like to have some consultation going on with us so you'll understand the traffic impacts and we can ameliorate those before that project goes forward. The second example is a major apartment complex. We have one on 45 South, right, that has a lot of people that need bus service, but unfortunately, the way it's been designed, there's no place that's we can easily place a bus stop. So we're thinking about we've expressed some interest, talking with the city, and saying perhaps we could figure out a way in your building codes, in your building permit process, that if an apartment complex is willing to give us a bus access point, a place where we can put a bus stop, they need to get a break on the number of spaces they have to have, on the argument that only a certain portion of their folks will be using cars. That gives them an opportunity to put more units in, gives us access. So that kind of planning on a very micro level, I think, is what really makes a difference. It's really methodical, it's painstaking, but it's what really is needed to make sure that when somebody's investing, they think about the transit implications of what they're doing. There's a whole other layer of this that we can get into about how do we help those folks who want to develop territories by providing transit services. The medical center I mentioned, great big new building that MD Anderson's putting up. It's about over 1 million square feet of space, right?
Yes, it's called the MC1 building.
Yeah. We're already working with them to make sure we can provide service to them when that building opens. There'll be a lot of people working on that. One more that we're going to let you all participate in the planning process here.
We, hopefully, as soon as the recession goes away in the next
Your mouth
few
be God's
years,
ear.
goes away in the next few years, would it be possible to get the 1/4 cent back?
It's a very interesting question. I think politically it's a very heavy lift. We are, just so, because this controversy keeps coming up, in all of our financial planning, we are assuming that it goes on. Now, this gets confusing because the Federal Transit Administration, when you submit plans to them, they have this idea that, well, if a contract runs out, then you can't show that money being paid out anymore. And the contract with the voters for the mobility program ends in September of 14.
Yeah.
Now, there's going to be an election to determine whether to continue it. So we submit 2 sets of numbers to the FTA. One says, here it is if the funds end in 14. Here's what happens if they don't. And we're very methodical about that. And I got to say, it confuses the heck out of the FTA. We had a very long conversation last week where I was trying to explain to the administrator how this general mobility program, he says, okay, so if we don't renew it, it just goes away as a tax. I said, no, we get it back. He said, well, why wouldn't you want to do that? I said, I didn't say we didn't want to do it. It's just a matter. So this was a very interesting, and they think we're crazy. You know, they shake their head at us. Yeah. Now, realistically, what we are trying to do in the short term, whatever happens long term, short term, we're trying to convince folks who are getting this money to use it for transit-oriented mobility. And one of the really nice examples that I'm pleased with is Steve Raddick came and asked us if we would help fund the improvements to hike and bike trails out by our Kingsland Park and Ride lot, out on the west side of the energy corridor. And we said, no, but if you're willing to take some of your mobility fund money, we'll put some metro money in too. So he's putting $750,000 in, we're putting $250,000 in. We're helping to upgrade the hike and bike trails, but we're connecting it by a bridge to our park and ride lot so bicycles and pedestrians will have access to the park and ride facility. We think that's a great idea of a connected trip concept and a transit-oriented development. I'm hoping that I can persuade the city to invest some of their mobility funds in bus shelters. Every time we put a bus shelter in a well-selected site, we add 35 boardings a day. 100 bus shelters properly sited, that's 1 million boardings a year. It's good for business. And it's good for the neighborhood if you get a shelter and a decent sidewalk, and maybe a covered culvert so people don't have to trip down a hole to get to a bus. So there's things we can do short of undoing the penny that I think can be beneficial to transit. Now, with that said, we're going to do some work here on thinking about ideas. We got people capturing ideas? Okay, so there's the comment board over here. So have at it. What would you like to see?
Well,
all right, well, since we asked.
you talked about, you got the near loop going with the Main Street line, the University line, and the Post Oak line. How about completing the loop? Something, something along Washington Avenue or the inner Katy line, which I seem to recall was on the ballot a few years ago.
The ballot was, the district, the ballot had a plan, a master plan on it as of then. Now, in the plan, if you look down in the detail of the ballot, it had several of those projects that were started. The North Line was started, the Southeast Line was started, Harrisburg was started, University from Wheeler West to Hillcroft was started. Those are the projects that were part of what was going to be done in this phase. So I always have to talk about that. But the inner Katy makes a lot of sense, I think. So this map is probably not going to give us the ability to show it here. Not yet. We want to draw the inner Katy line. Who does this? Who's doing this?
There's Mike right
there. He is.
There you go.
This is a little different. In the regional, in the local meetings, we have maps of this specific areas. They got more detail to them, so I'll have to blow it up to this. But and the folks in Super Neighborhood 22 have actually put together a transit plan which calls for significant inter-Katy development, transit development, including I think they would like to see a trolley, a tram, some sort of thing on Washington Avenue. That's their goal. So there's one there. Any other thoughts? Yes, sir.
Seems to me like if you have a long-range plan, you really should connect to like the woodlands or connect to Sugarland. Like you have enough ridership because of the density. How's that taking place?
Well, I mean, one possibility on Sugarland would be to take that 98 corridor project and extend it out, that rail line, and extend it out to Sugarland. In the shorter term, Another possibility, and correct me if I'm just sort of making policy up, but I should do this. I do this sometimes, and the staff gets horrified. What did you say? That's the way you make progress. Visionary leaps. They don't quite characterize it that way. But the other possibility would be extend park and ride service out to the Sugar Land area. Now, they have their own Fort Bend Transit Authority there that provides service. So that would take some negotiation. But I do think we've had expressions of interest from several communities outside the service area to have some sort of park and ride or commuter service for their residents because they still work in Houston if they live outside our service area. So two possibilities would be, one, to extend the 98 corridor line. Oops, they moved the head on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. Roughly down South Main, out to Missouri City staff, and basically carry it on out to Sugar Land, maybe to the ballpark out there. What do they call those places? The Skeeters? Okay, whatever. The other question, that was not an editorial comment. I get in so much trouble for this. All right, the other question you have is about the woodlands. Again, I think that, well, there's several options. One would be rail. One would be bus rapid transit. One would be to further extend our park and ride service up that way. So there's at least three mode options there. Something else you can think of?
Well, one of the main focuses there is one of our strategic priorities is becoming a trusted regional partner, and that's developing those relationships with those partners. Because both Sugar Land and Woodlands has transit service that is provided for them into our area now. And we look at ways that we can partner and provide those services, help make it operate more smoothly for them. And we do some of that now with Baytown and Pasadena, and to different degrees of success, depending on how it's operated. But we are looking at doing more of that. And certainly the relationships we have now have been very valuable, and other people are starting to see that we are
I was just thinking of expanding ridership,
Yes.
considerably when you have a
We actually
high density, large number of people.
met with John Sedlak, who's got our executive vice president, who also got the title of director of strategic partnering. We met with the county commissioners in Montgomery County. And one of the things that we're doing on 45 right now is extending the park and ride using diamond lanes, working with TxDOT into Montgomery County. So that's just a small example of some of the partnering we're trying to do.
I had a couple of suggestions on transit centers.
Okay.
One is on Stella Link near South Main. And what I was wondering is if it would be possible if you found that appropriate to have the rail, if you have the rail coming from Missouri City to pass through that transit center. Because you can bring a number of routes, including the Hiram Clark, the route on Belford and through that station.
Actually, a couple of the alternatives that are being considered would go through that area.
By the way, what you're seeing now is the way, if you go online to do the interactive, you do your route, you can make your comments, give your name and information, and then submit the documents. We're basically doing this as we do it online. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Oh, no, circular. Okay.
This is actually the same area. The whole area between 90 and 59 outside the loop. Right now, there's huge numbers of people living there, Meyerland, Meyer Park, Westbury, all that area. And hooking into the rail service once it develops the way you're talking about is right now either an automobile or bus ride. And I'm wondering if something like Fannin Station to West Belford or down West Belford a ways or something like that. It's all people. I don't think there's many jobs there, but a lot of them have jobs.
Right. And that's what that US 98 corridor is looking at doing. We have to do that because if we're able to do that 98, we'll need federal help, federal dollars to help do that line. And so the federal process requires that we do an environmental study that looks at all of that, the surrounding land use, how many people live there versus work there, where they're traveling to, and that's exactly what we're doing now. In fact, in that area too, where some of it that's empty now, there are actually some proposals for future developments. And we take all that into consideration. What are they planning to develop there? What impact would it have on future service?
So 90 corridor is a broad name, not just for 90, but...
Exactly. Yes, actually, it starts at the Fannin South Station. and comes across that West Belford, Holmes Road area, and then ends up really getting on 90A past that point.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, have you designated any areas where bus rapid transit might be more economical and appropriate?
Actually, we have, George talked about two of the lines that we have in operation. Well, let me step backwards, because there are different flavors of bus rapid transit, okay? And some of what we put on the streets today that is considered bus rapid transit are signature service routes. They're not in an area separated, no dedicated lane, but it is limited stop service. It has a branding to it, and it pretty much has a fixed path, okay? We have about 6 of those routes on the table that we would like to implement in the future. And 2 of those have already gone into place, one being the Bel Air Quick Line and one being the 426 Swift Line. What we'd like to do as part of this phase of planning is start talking to people about bus rapid transit in the sense where it does have the dedicated lane or dedicated guideway, and where are the appropriate places for that, so that you may have places where that bus is more feasible to be in a fixed guideway, and then it goes off into these developing activity centers or job centers to be able to serve them better. Because if you notice when George talked through the map of density and distribution of employment, there are distinct clusters of it where there's heavy concentrations, but there are long corridors of concentration as well. And so some of those may be better served by something that has a little more flexibility.
Barry?
Yeah, George, as you know, roughly half this region is opposed to rail based on the 2003 referendum. And I recall your remark at the beginning of your statements that you're looking at all things that Metro is doing today, and some we may not want to continue. So I'd like to suggest to you that what you should be looking at is what you actually mentioned during your remarks, is trying to program putting buses every 6 minutes on the major freeways or major thoroughfares. And look at that and take the $4 billion you plan to spend on the next 4 or 5 rail lines and do a calculation as to how many bus service you could provide for that $4 billion. Would you be willing to do that in the planning you're doing?
We're looking at everything, but the math doesn't work in what you're saying, because that $4 billion figure that you cite is a little misleading in terms of that's not all operating money.
No, that's capital. You're talking about capital.
The capital money, you operate buses with operating money, not capital money.
Sure.
You don't sell bonds to operate buses. You don't get money from the federal government, with some exceptions, to operate buses. So the $4 billion figure is an all-in figure for construction. It's not for operating costs. Now, fairness, a certain portion of that money will be local money. Because, for example, for reasons I do not comprehend, the 2003 referendum said that the bonds the voters authorized in that election can be used for a federally funded line, i.e. the north or the southeast corridor, but not a locally funded line. We're having to build the East End line totally with local funds. It's a crazy deal. I might add, it gets even more complicated because as we get reimbursed by the federal government, we need to make sure that if we spent bond funds originally that we're getting reimbursed for, we don't then turn around and spend that money on anything besides the north and the southeast corridor. It's a little insane, but that's what we're doing. So the comparison doesn't work. The numbers just don't work. Now, short of that, we're certainly looking at every option for expanding service. And that's the purpose of these conversations, to say what are the places that should be priorities. And the person that asked about, Janet, when she asked about the mobility funds, the fact is that $2 billion mobility program is $2 billion that could have been contributed totally towards operating costs. Could have done exactly what you're suggesting. Or it could have been used to bond out many billions of dollars, and we could not be talking to the federal government at all. We could be building we'd have the system built, and we still have money left over to do some of these additional things you'd like. So there's other options, just that $4 billion figure comparison doesn't work.
If the numbers don't work, you must have a report that reaches that conclusion. Can we have a copy of that?
It doesn't. You don't need a conclusion, Barry. The fact is you can't use capital money for operating.
I know that. I'm talking about the report that looks at operating money as well as capital money. If you say the numbers don't work, you must have a report that reaches that conclusion.
I can do that off the top of my head. I don't need a report to tell me that if I'm going to spend several billions of dollars on a capital project, that money is not going to be accessible unless it's dollars.
Of course,
not
Metro has other revenue.
Remember the bulk of that money comes from 2 sources. It comes from bond program, and it comes from federal grants, neither of which are available for operating costs.
You're losing ridership today with this current program Why don't you have a report that shows that bus?
What's your in the spirit of this thing, what's your suggestion for improving ridership? That's what we're looking for. What are your suggestions?
Maximize buses, optimize the bus program, and stop building rail.
Okay, then we got it.
There's a question.
We're not losing ridership today.
Huh? We're actually gaining ridership year over year. We're just like everybody else is in the recovery. I mean, as the recovery continues, we are seeing an increase in our ridership year over year. Our sales tax is currently running about 7% ahead of last year, and 3% ahead of what we budgeted. So actually, it's the other way around. So we're doing very well on sales tax, relatively speaking. We're still not back to where we were in 2008, but we should be back to it by 2012. So we're like every other business. When people stop going to work, they stop riding the parking lot. When people stop going to work and they're not employed at the medical center, they don't take the train. We've suffered the way every other business has, but we're regaining. There was a question back here that here, I'll try to get everybody. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my question is regarding the energy corridor. And the energy, is there any plan to connect it, what is the north till maybe 290 and connecting south till 90, basically? And maybe Highway 6 or Eldridge Parkway or
Those are certainly all things that we've looked at in our long-range plan, and so we can add that comment that that's still something of interest.
Do you have a specific suggestion about a specific connection?
Yeah, my idea was from starting along somewhere on Highway 6 and going from 290 all the way to 90.
So you talk about a north-south connector that goes from Highway 290 down to Highway US 98. And we did have, that actually was a signature service route in the previous long-range plan. That was I guess we called it the Highway 6 or Gessner signature service route.
You're going to mark that one. And let's go around. Wait, hang on a second. There was that. I'm going to make sure I get everybody a chance to talk. So hang on, I know, I'll come back to you. Stay back here.
Yes, I would suggest bringing in service, park and ride service maybe from the Sugarland area and 290 along 59 and 290 to the West Chase area via West Ham Houston or Beltway 8.
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Repeat one more time.
Sure, and bringing in
suggestions.
Service like from park and rides from Sugarland and 290 areas to the West Chase area via 59 and 290 utilizing Beltway 8 or West Ham Houston, whichever.
And that's a suggestion for service?
Yes.
Okay. All right, we'll report that.
Kimberly,
You're not getting the map and recording over here. We're a little slow on the map.
Sure, we're doing transcribing over here in maps where we can capture it.
Let's see, who's not had a chance to say something? Yes, sir.
Well, I wanted to challenge your initial objectives for Metro. You were talking about multimodal and paying cabs to haul people and things of that nature. I guess what I would like to see, and I think the critics of Metro generally point to the lack of growth in ridership. It's not growing as fast as population, not growing as fast as vehicle miles and so forth. What I'd like to see is a laser focus on transit. I mean, this is what what your role is. There are other people that will provide the hot lanes. There are other people that will provide. We don't have to worry about TxDOT building roads. They'll build as many roads as they can borrow money for it, regardless of where they are. But I'm not sure that Metro has this laser focus on getting more people into public transit. And to me, that ought to be where you're focused on. I mean, hotlines are one of them, one questionable game. But just looking at your rail outlook here, I know that there's some limitations from the original referendum, but there are more people on the university, forecast on the university line, than all three of them you're working on now. That's upside down. You're looking wrong the telescope.
Well, I mean, I hear what you're saying. I guess what I would just gently disagree is I think we are very focused on that. Now, I see your point on the HOV-HOT thing. And by the way, just to understand the logic of the HOV thing, we have about, as I said, about 100 miles of HOV lanes. One of our operating principles that we've instituted in the last year is what we call asset utilization. The notion that if we have an asset, we want to make sure we get the maximum return on that investment. The problem with the HOV lanes is not that they're not been successful, but they're not used 24/7 at full capacity. So we have underused assets. And so the notion is if we can convert them through some mechanical changes so that we get more utilization, since the investment's been made, it makes sense. I might add there's some other benefits too. It also allows us to operate those HOV lanes on the weekends, and in emergencies it allows us to flow traffic away from danger areas more rapidly. So that's the thinking. But I understand your argument on that. Well, on the university line, I would say we're focused on building as fast as we can, but It's a project for which we do not have the current funding, nor do we have authorization from the voters for the funding or the federal government. So we're moving
That
as
should be
quickly as we can.
the priority, as
It
opposed
is.
to these
Trust me,
other-
it is. But part of the problem is Congress is the one that's got to reauthorize the program. What we're trying to do is keep the thing moving as fast as we can, given the vagaries of national politics.
I think your long-term objectives should have specific goals about ridership growth relative to population or relative to market share of the total. Seems to me most businesses look at their business that way. Now, there's a lot of stuff about we're going to build this, we're going to build that, but is it really focused on transit and making, if we're not growing transit as fast as the growth in population in your area, then you're losing market share.
Let me say, I agree with the idea of having benchmarks. I think that's a good idea. I would disagree with the point that we're not working as hard as focused as much as maybe we think we should. But I'll put one more piece on the table. I think that transit in this region, this after you're looking at it, is severely underfunded given the size of the job. That's just my view. Especially when you take a quarter cent and apply it to general mobility. Whether you approve the program or not, as a practical matter, it significantly reduces the cash that you need to run the program. So we're kind of half in agreement, half in disagreement. But we captured your thoughts. There was somebody. This fellow here, and then this gentleman here, and then come back up here. Yes, sir.
I guess maybe continuing on some of that line, is there a process in the planning process where you look at a bus route and say, we've exceeded capacity, we need to go to a bigger bus, we need to go to a more signature bus, but from what he was mentioning, it doesn't sound like that is the case. In other words, I don't know if there is a line that currently serves the university rail line process. Would it be wise to put in a bus service there, see how it does, and then once you've reached or exceeded that capacity, then you dump the rail line?
That's exactly the process we go through. It's the process that developed the red line. The reason the red line is so successful is it was a very thoughtfully chosen route connecting two major activity centers, downtown and the medical center. And it took 200 buses an hour off of Main Street when the line went in. But the goal isn't just to replace the buses. The goal is to encourage additional growth in ridership. And in fact, something over 40% of the folks that use that system were not using transit at all, metro at all, before the line went in. So what you're saying is exactly the way it's approached. You want to talk more about...
In addition, let's take the university line as an example. There is a process that you go through. When I spoke earlier about projects having federal funding or seeking federal funding, you have to do an environmental process. You also evaluate alternatives that are feasible or reasonable for carrying the demand in that area. And we went through 55 alternatives for along that corridor. And the public, there was heavy public participation. We narrowed that down, and the alternative and the technology, the alignment and the technology being rail and alignment being the one that is on the boards now, is what the community said they wanted. We did put options for operating with bus service, but that was not what was desired by the community. So that process that the federal government puts forward is what we have to follow to make sure that we're doing what the community desires.
We're going to be short of time. I need to go around. Can we do an offline conversation? Sure. Okay, we'll stay with it for a few minutes. Yes, sir. And then this gentleman here.
I want to follow up on what you said about the general mobility fund. You stated that you don't intend to revisit that in the near future. What do you intend to do about that?
Right now, this is my half of 14 years of public life before I took this job. I think politically right now it's not something that's first of all, Metro is not in a position to argue that can be successful. There are 14 small cities, City of Houston and Harris County, especially the 14 small cities in the City of Houston who rely on that money and would be very hard pressed to give it up. What can we do in the short term? I think that trying to reorient some of that money towards more transit-oriented as opposed to just strictly street paving projects is probably a more realistic thing. Now, longer term, let's go back to the gentleman's question about funding, about you were talking about. When we get this plan together, believe me, there's going to be a very intense transit plan. And it's going to cost about 6 times what we can afford. And so that's where the prioritization about what do we need to do. It's not that we're not full of bright ideas about where we can put transit in. It's the question of resources. Even if the quarter cent were to come back to us, we'd probably still be limited on resources, but we'd have a lot more room to run than we do right now. So our thinking right now is it's not something that's feasible to challenge. with our service area components. Remember, our board is made up of 5 members from the city of Houston, 2 from Harris County, and 2 from the 14 small cities. So the mayors of those small cities choose their 2 board members. And right now, I don't see those 14 mayors of those small cities telling their board members, go ahead and give up that penny that's bringing back a certain amount of revenue to our city. I don't see the mayor of the city of Houston appointing 5 board members with that charge, nor the Harris County folks. So we need to work within the realm of what's realistic political. Now, as the community's thinking evolves about transit, that may change. Kleinberg's studies, the Kinder Institute studies, last year showed that when people were asked, where should we spend our mobility money? 42% said streets and roads, but 52% said bus and rail. This year, the same study talked about what kind of environment you want to live in, and traditionally, although traditionally people want to live in a suburban environment with a house and big yards and everything, a significant portion, somewhere in the 40% range, were saying, I really want to be in an urban environment with access to urban amenities and transit. So attitudes in the community are changing. That will eventually change the thinking about where these revenues need to go. But in the short term, we've got to be realistic about what we can accomplish and what we can do within the context that exists. Very much being a realist about this stuff. We could stamp our feet and yell and scream. I think all we'd end up doing is hurting our feet, hurting our voice. One up here, real quick. Well, this gentleman, I've been promising him forever. Now come over here.
What's Mr. doing to encourage joint development, mixed use, high density, especially around the station? This is a tremendous opportunity because it will increase your ridership. The city will have more taxes. I think it's absolutely essential. Mobility is fine, but you need joint development, especially around your
At the present time, we do not have a policy that I feel comfortable with regarding transit-oriented development of the type you're talking about, where we basically engage in some sort of joint development, for example, around the Wheeler Station where the Sears store is on Main Street.
But HGAC
We are,
is.
huh?
But HGAC is doing exactly what.
HGAC is looking at that, but our policy is not established yet. It was out there in the past, but it's led to some mistakes. You may have known that sometime back, about 3 months ago, I had to write off, Metro had to write off, about $41 million of expenditures with regard to an intermodal facility north of the University of Houston downtown for plans and designs that will never get implemented. And really what that was a big, fancy, transit-oriented development project that never got off the ground. So before we engage in any TODs of any kind, I want to make sure we know what we're doing. Huh? The obstacles are how much risk should the public agency take, how much risk should it allow a private developer to shift to the public sector, how much should the public sector contribute to a private developer who's got a for-profit motive, and what really works. And then how do you decide what's best for an area? We were approached by a developer last fall for a proposed project on our property of Wheeler. We have a fairly large tract of land there. And the financing for it fell apart, so it never got considered in depth. But one of the things we were angsting over was this really the kind of development we wanted at Wheeler? Was this really going to benefit the neighborhood, much less our plans? So it's not just a matter of the finances and the fairness and who gets what. It's also a matter of, judgment calls about where the community should be going in terms of development. We are going to put policy together about that.
Stick to transit.
Huh?
Let other people develop.
Well, that's right now. The only transit-oriented development we're doing now is where we got somebody who comes in and says, "I'm putting a big project in near your station. Can we do something to sort of connect me in more effectively?" Or a classic example is the venue apartments at Museum District, which are right abutting our rail line, where we did work very closely with the developer of that project so that he could have a street allow garage access, and we signalized that street so that it would be safe with the train there. And then, of course, he advertises on a half block from the train station. So right now, that's about the most I can feel comfortable with. We have to do that. I don't think this is where actually I agree. Our mission is not land development. Our mission is to facilitate that as part of facilitating the economic health of the community. But does that really require us to be in joint venture with folks, or should we be supporting people who are doing creative things on the private side? That's a debate we're not complete yet.
George, why don't we have this be your last question?
I've warned you, that's right. I'm sorry, this always happens.
Very short. What is the amount of that 4% going into general mobility every year?
Right now, our sales tax projection for this year is at 512. I believe that's right. It went up a little bit again. It was 502 roads again. So let's just say it's 500 million. It's a little low, 500 million. 1/4 of that goes into the mobility fund. That's 125 million. Now, a further complication is when I got into the job, I assumed that Metro was putting aside 1/4 of each month's sales tax check into an escrow account for the mobility fund. What I found, and then when the city or the county or the small cities needed their money, they'd make a request and we'd pay it, right? What I found out was that Metro was spending the entire sales tax check every month. And then when the city wanted some money, they would simply go and borrow using commercial paper. So I walked in and found $167 million of commercial paper debt. And a backlog of money that had not been paid out but people were eligible for. So what we're doing now, every month, when the check comes in, if it's a $10 million check, $2.5 million goes into the escrow account. In addition, because there's money due folks that they've not claimed yet, we're also putting another $5 million in to cover the backlog that someday they will ask for. So if it's a $10 million check, $2.5 million plus $5 million goes into that escrow account. Now you run a business like ours, with the demands we've got, with that much money being taken off the top, you know, it's an interesting challenge. How do I put that? We will please use the online interactive service. We had this is a lively dialogue, but we really need your ideas. If you don't like what we're doing, we still want to hear that. But what I really ask is, if you don't like what we're doing, then tell us what we should do instead. And I'll give Barry credit. Barry has a lot of opposition to some of the things we're doing, but he put a perfectly credible suggestion on the table in terms of improving bus service. The question is, how much of that can you do, even if you ditched all the capital programs you're doing right now? But it's one thing that's well worth thinking about. And I want to thank you all for your time and your attention today. Thanks so much.
I have a couple of housekeeping things for you. If you picked up this flyer or didn't pick up a flyer, this is a list of all the other public meetings that we have, public workshops. In this round one, we will be doing 2 more rounds in the future of all these public meetings. The second round, we hope to come back to you with all the comments that we received across the region and talk about what did you say, what finances are available to the future, and have you help us set priorities of laying out the plan for the future. The third round is to come back with that final plan and say, this is what you told us, and here's how it looks financially. So more meetings. Also, if you really enjoyed what you did today, we would ask that you sign in, make sure you sign in. This way you can receive our newsletters on the project so you can keep up with the progress of where we are, what we've heard, and what we're doing. If you'd like to be part of it, please do that. And one other thing we ask as a favor to us, we have a comment card here. Would you please take the time to either fill out a comment card today and give it back to us, or take it and mail it in to us? And if nothing else, please join us on the website and sit down at the interactive map and give us your ideas for the future. Thank you.
May I get your contact information?